Okay. We are in our third class on Basi Legani, Tafshin Chaf, Maimer, the Rebbe said on Yud Shvat in 1960, and we're in the middle of chapter 3. We're going to be on page Yud Zayin in the handout, which reminds me I should really put another link to the Maimer here in the chat, make it easier. Let's do that 1 second. Let's see, a little slow here. Okay, hopefully we have that up and running momentarily. Here's the link. Okay. So the link for the Maimer to follow along inside is in the chat. We're in the middle of chapter 3. We're going to be on page Yud Zayin, page 17, the second paragraph of chapter 3 of Basi Legani Tafshin Chaf. So what we've said till now was we have been breaking down the 10th chapter of the previous Rebbe's Basi Legani, and we quoted the Baal Shem Tov, and we have identified the first part of the chapter 10 of the Friedrich Rebbe's Maimer. He starts with saying that this is V'asali Migdash V'shachanti B'Seichem, building a home for God in this world, and that our service causes istalik yikar d'koshebrichu b'chol in a revelation of the glory of God in all worlds. And we've identified the fact that what we're talking about, the revelation that happens, or what is accessed, is the essence of God. And then we quoted from the Baal Shem Tov, a beautiful teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, where what we highlighted primarily, the Rebbe really says that all of the points in our Maimer, there are 3 basic points in our Maimer, which are the 3 basic points of the previous Rebbe's chapter 10. All 3 points are really in the Baal Shem Tov's talk, in his teaching, but we focused on one aspect that we extracted from it, which is the idea that we're talking about the essence of God. That through our service we access the essence of God because God is waiting, as it were, to hear from us. We quoted Melech Gadol V'Noira, God the great and awesome King, and we said King as he is removed from everything, the Hisnas Atzmis, as we've discussed in the previous class. So that's what we extracted from there, and that really closed out the first point, the opening point in the previous Rebbe's chapter, in chapter 10 of his Maimer, which is that through our avodah, through our service, we access and bring into the world Atzmos, the essence of God. And the point we alluded to it from a bunch of different angles, but one of the points is that we're talking about, it referred to in the Maimer as Soiviv, as the transcendent light, but really we're not just talking about transcendent light, we're talking about the essence, as we've explained. But the point is, it goes everywhere equally. Then the Friedrich Rebbe, the next point in his Maimer he goes to in chapter 10 is Hayesheves Baganim. The verse Hayesheves Baganim is in the end of the Song of Songs, where he says that the one sitting in the gardens, friends are listening to his voice. Let me hear your voice. I want to hear your voice. Hashmini. And so we started chapter 3 by quoting this verse, and what the Rebbe says here, that there are 3 interpretations of this verse, 3 allusions to who the verse is, 3 interpretations of who the verse is alluding to. And we focused here in the Maimer on 2 of them, on the 2 extremes, the 2 ends of the spectrum. The higher level, we said, Hayesheves Beganim, we're talking about souls in heaven. And Ganim is plural because there are many levels of heaven. And they are Chaverim, they're friends, because they because one soul impacts and affects the other. And they hear the sound of the Torah of the Jewish people down here in this world. When we study Torah, so that impacts the neshamas in all worlds, and really all of the higher realms, even up into Atzilus, to the highest of levels. Another interpretation we said was Hayesheves Beganim, is that the Jew is sitting in exile. And Ganim means that we're not just sitting in exile, but we actually delight in exile. We've lost our way and found new pleasures in exile. So we're talking about Jews in a lowly spiritual state. And nevertheless, Chaverim, friends, and that's a reference to the angels. The angels come to hear us as we put everything aside, notwithstanding whatever it is that we're absorbed into. We go out, we go into the shul, we go into the study hall, and we study Torah. And the angels listen to what we're saying. So these are the two interpretations that the Rebbe brings in the Maimer on Hayeshevas Beganim. Now, it seems that chapter 10 of the previous Rebbe's Maimer, as we mentioned in our first class, I believe, is the end of the second of a Maimer. It's the first half. It's the end of the first half of the Frierdiker Rebbe's series on Basi Legani. And so the first Maimer opens with Basi Legani, and the second Maimer opens with Hayeshevas Beganim. Every Maimer, traditionally, typically, usually, a Maimer will open with a verse, and at the end of the Maimer, generally, the Maimer will close out what it opened with. So a Maimer will be bookended with a verse, and then some kind of analysis of that verse, a breakdown of the verse, questions on the verse. Then the Maimer will launch into the subject matter it wants to talk about, and based on what is explained, it will then address. Typically, it'll go back and address the questions that were asked in the beginning of the Maimer. So it seems, chapter 10 is the end of the second Maimer, and so the previous Rebbe is sort of closing everything out, tying everything together, and then he also ties it to the previous Maimer, to Basi Legani. So he's tying Basi Legani and Hayeshevas Beganim together. The Rebbe points out here that it's all, obviously everything is significant, and this is all part of the message that the Rebbe is giving us. He's not just trying to tie the Maimer in a nice little bow, open with Hayeshevas Beganim, and then close and address the questions, but it's necessary for us to understand the message of the Maimer. It's integral to the Maimer. And that's what we're holding here on page Yud Zayin, the middle paragraph. So, but just before we explain it, this seemingly there's a problem here, which is, as we just explained, the first idea that the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about in chapter 10 is the idea of drawing the essence of God into the world. So if we're talking about drawing the essence of God into the world, or as he calls it here, Soivev, we're talking about transcendence. The quality, the uniqueness of transcendence is that it's everywhere equally. Everything is equal, higher, lower. And so therefore, we talk about something that's so great, it's such a great light, that it can be everywhere equally. Because the highest level and the lowest levels are equal to something that is infinitely removed from them. To infinity, higher and lower are the same. And so we're talking about this energy, this divine awareness that is equal everywhere. If it's equal everywhere, it means that everything is insignificant to it. And then suddenly we launch into Hayeshevas Beganim. We're talking about Ganim, we're talking about gardens, we're talking about the higher Gan Eden, we're talking about the lower Gan Eden, we're talking about angels, we're talking about souls, and that each one of these levels or stages or levels of awareness of godliness experiences some kind of revelation specific to it. In Chassidic terminology, this would be termed as Memale Kol Almin, the imminent light. So you have a transcendent light, you have an imminent light. What's the difference between them? Transcendence, it shines equally everywhere. It has no consideration for where it's shining, because where it's shining is the place is irrelevant to it. They're all the same. But imminent light means something that is specific and unique to a specific location, a specific space. It measures the capacity of what it is, where it's going, and how to deliver whatever it is it needs, whatever is necessary for it. That's Mamale Kol Almin, where every level, every stage is significant, not insignificant. So if that's the case, if we're talking about Soivev, if we're talking about bringing a transcendent light, a light that is beyond everything and anything, so it doesn't matter if we're talking about angels in heaven, it doesn't matter if we're talking about souls in Atzilus or souls in Bria or in any other level, it's all the same. And yet we're saying that no, there's a measured aspect of godliness that affects and impacts these places. So this seems to be a totally different idea. Not only a different idea, it almost seems sort of like a contradictory thing. We're talking about bringing the essence of God into this world. So how do we launch suddenly into a totally different topic of bringing in a measured light? Is it significant or insignificant? So we have to understand how these two ideas come together. So the Rebbe says like this, middle of chapter 3, page Yud Zayin. V'yesh levayir hemshech hanyanim b'maimer. We can explain the flow of ideas here in the Maimer, meaning in chapter 10 of the previous Rebbe's Maimer. This notion, the fact that through our service in this world, that enhances the souls impacts the souls that are sitting in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, to the souls that are in the highest levels of Gan Eden, as we talked about in the last class. The highest level, even in Atzilus. Or the Eden that from which the river flows into the garden, the highest of levels. As well as the enhancement of the angels that happens as a result of our service. What does it mean when we say an enhancement of the souls in heaven are enhanced, the angels are enhanced? What does that mean that they're enhanced? It means that they experience greater divine consciousness. They're God conscious, but a greater divine consciousness. So if they're experiencing a greater divine consciousness, the consciousness they should be able to experience is one that they can handle, one that they can appreciate. That's the nature of consciousness. It's not overwhelming, but something that they can now be elevated to. They're enhanced. They're elevated to greater sensitivity to godliness. That's unique to each level according to its capacity. If that's the case, so move on. So then it's understood. And then we're not talking here about the level of istalik in the level that we talked about in the first part of the mimer here, which is the level of the level of transcendent light, which shines equally in all worlds. Because as we said, that's transcendent, it's infinitely removed from everything, and therefore can be everywhere equally. What we're talking about is the mamala light, the imminent light of God. And what's unique about the imminent light of God is its characteristic is that it comes in a manner of being enclosed and in a manner of evolution, so to speak, in each and every level, in each stage. So the imminent light, what does it mean that it's imminent? It means it relates and adapts to every single level according to its capacities and its ability. In every stage, in every world, according to its capacity and its makeup. In the higher Gan Eden, it affects it in one way. And the angels in the world of Asiya, it affects them in a different way. So seemingly, we're talking about two different things. We started by talking about the whole point of our service of God is to bring the infinite light of God into this world. And then suddenly, Hayeshavas Beganim, now we're talking about imminent light. We're talking about two different things. But this is actually the explanation, what the mimer is saying. First, he explains that through our service down here, we reveal the glory of God in all worlds. Meaning, that we're drawing and accessing the transcendent light and till true transcendence, which true transcendence is his God's essence, the essence of God. When you can talk about transcendence, and then there's true transcendence. True transcendence means you can't even really call it transcendence, because even transcendence is some kind of a definition. So there's, when you think about infinity, so you say something is infinite. By saying something is infinite, you're implying you're applying a restriction to it, which is that it's infinite and therefore it's not finite. So true infinity is something that could be infinite and finite. But if we were to speak like that, we'd be going in circles. What is it? Infinity means we're contrasting infinite versus finite. So there's the Eira Seiviv, there's the infinite light. But then there is Seiviv Hamiti, true infinity, which is the essence of Hashem, which is not definable in any way and can't be characterized with any of these characterizations. So that's the first thing we're talking about. But then he adds that this very service, the divine service down here, which brings the infinite transcendent light of God. This is payelas because it also achieves another thing, something else in regarding drawing godliness down. It also draws the imminent light of God, the personal, tailored light of God, the measured light into all worlds. Obviously, it doesn't say b'shava, not equally, because it's not equal, because it's b'chol olam l'pinyan, in each world according to its capacity and its function. As well as not just in the world, but also in the souls and the angels in each world, each one according to its capacity. Okay, so we've identified two themes here. Our service, divine service, brings the infinite light of God. We make a home for God. For God, as we said, Dirilat Smusay, we make a home for the essence of God. And that is expressed in the term of the mimer of Oyer HaSefer, the transcendent light that shines equally everywhere. That description allows us to understand we're talking about the essence of God. But it also causes a drawing of divine energy that is measured and tailored to each world. So first of all, why is that necessary? Why is it necessary to know that? If we're talking about making a home for God's essence, so why do I need? So what's mamala? Like the saying goes, "Shrage b'tir hanale." What's the purpose? What's the use of a candle in broad daylight? It seems to be unnecessary. But also, we have to understand what this means. That through our service, we accomplish both things. How we need to understand what that means. What does it mean that our service can do these two things, especially if we consider that these two ideas, transcendence and immanence, are two polar opposites? They're two different worlds in a sense. So how is it that through the Jews' service in this world, they accomplish both things? How do they come together? So that's what we need to understand. So we're starting by stating the fact, and the previous Rebbe is telling us in his mimer that he wants us to know that we accomplish both things. First, he talks about making a home for the essence of God, but then he says it's not enough. Hayeshev is beganim. There's also this other idea, which is the notion of bringing the imminent light as well. But we have to understand what this means. So the Rebbe continues, and he introduces, in order to understand it, the Rebbe introduces a teaching from the Maggid of Mizrach. So if Yuvan Zalpi, Teiras Harav Maggid, we can understand this based on a teaching of the Maggid of Mizrach, on a saying of the sages on a medrash. In this week's the parsha, the weekly parsha, which is then was Parshas B'Shalach, the time the Maimer said is Parshas B'Shalach. So medrash on B'Shalach, where the medrash says B'Yam nidma lehem kebachar, that at the sea, God appeared to the people as a bachar, as a young man. U'b'Sinai nidma lehem kezaken, and at Sinai he appeared to them as an older person. Well, before we get to the question, what does this mean? The medrash, basically, this is a medrash, and in Mechilta, like Achtav, we see down in footnote 39. And it's also Rashi. It's maybe better known from the Rashi in Chumash. Rashi on the pasuk Anochi Hashem Elokecha, on the very first of the Ten Commandments. I am God, your God, who took you out of Egypt. So Rashi asks, why it wasn't so long ago. So God appears to the Jewish people right away. He has to identify who he was. When he came and said, I am God, they didn't know who they were talking to, who was talking to them. They were just busy with God now for the last little while in Egypt, coming out of Egypt and all the miracles. Why does he have to say, I'm the one who took you out of Egypt? So Rashi basically references this medrash because they perceived God in one way at the splitting of the sea, and they perceived him another way at Sinai. So therefore, God has to identify himself and say, the young man that you saw at the sea, that's me, the old man that you see now. So the Maggid asks a question. It's not understood. The verse says, you did not see any image. God says to the Jewish people, you didn't see an image of God. There's no image of God. Certainly, we would say God, not only we not see an image, but certainly not specific images that also change. Here's a young man, here's an old man. So what does this mean? That the people perceived God as a young person at the sea and as an old person at Sinai. If God doesn't have an image, and the verse itself, this is a medrash, but the verse itself says, you didn't see any image of God. So how did they have one image in one place and another image in another place? So the Maggid explains it like this. He uses the metaphor of a father who loves his son. And because of the great love that he has for his son, so it's engraved in the image of the son is engraved in the mind of the father as the child stands before the father. So the father sees his son standing before him, and because of his great love for his son, that image that he has of his son standing before him is engraved in his mind. It's always there. When the child is young, so what's engraved in the father's mind when he suddenly tries to picture his son? The image of his son as a young child. But when his son grows up, when he imagines his son in his mind, he sees his son as a grown-up. So that's the metaphor. that a child is engraved in the parent's mind. Engraved. But even though it's engraved, that imagery changes, that engraving changes based on the appearance of the child. When it's a young child, the parent's image engraved in their mind is of a young child, and when they're older, it's as they're older. So how does this answer the question? So the Maggid continues, says like this: it's known ki Yisrael alu b'machshava. Medrash says Yisrael alu b'machshava, that the Jewish people arose in God's mind. What does it mean that they arose in God's mind? Pirush shehem tamid nechkakim b'machshava ha'elyono. They're always engraved in the higher mind of God. K'moshe ben chakok b'machshavas aviv, just as a son is engraved in his father's mind. That's the meaning of that Israel is in God's mind. That the image of the Jewish people is engraved in God's mind, just as a child is engraved in the parent's mind. V'hinei kishaben miskashu b'maisav, when the child excels in his actions. V'toiv be'enei aviv hamaisim shaloi, and his father approves of his action, of what he does, his deeds. Kachu chakol machshavas aviv. So that's how he is in his father's mind. And if heaven forbid it's the opposite, then the engraving is also that way. When we say that the child's image in the parent's mind, it's not just talking about age, that you see a young child or an older child, but we're talking about the entirety of the child. If it's a good child, what's the image in the parent's mind? The image of a good child. And if the child is misbehaving, what's the image that comes to mind? A misbehaving child. So the imagery of the child is not just the appearance, the face, or the external image. We're talking about the entirety of the person, the whole personality, the whole character. All of that is engraved. This is then what the verse says. If God were to, when God will wash away the filth of the daughters of Zion, the daughters of Tzion, meaning the Jewish people. So the pasuk says in Yeshaya, it's talking about the times of Mashiach, when God is going to gather the exiles and the Jewish people who have tsoya, who are filthy, dirty, and soiled from exile, from their time in exile. God will wash it away. Im here doesn't mean if, but when. It's certainly going to happen. That God will wash away. He will cleanse. He will clean the daughters of Zion. He will clean the Jewish people, clean them of the filth that attached itself to them during exile. But here, the Maggid translates it a little differently. He says, that it's God, so to speak, cleans himself from the filth of the Jewish people. Because they're engraved, as it were, in his mind, so to speak, metaphorically speaking. When the Rebbe said this, he choked up when he was saying these words, this concept that God has to clean himself from the filth that's attached to the Jewish people. Why does he have to clean himself? Because since the people are engraved in God's mind, so if they're filthy, what's the image in God's mind? Filthy child. And so that filth is present. It's not just the child that's present in God's mind, but the child of this filth. This is a very profound concept, an idea, a teaching, that it's not just that God has an image of the pristine child. The Jewish people, as they are perfect, that's how they're always in God's mind. Which would imply that if they go astray, they get busy with other things. So yeah, it's very nice to hold on to the image of your child as you like to see your child in your mind, but are you really connected with that child? A parent that has certain ambitions and values that they want to impart on their child, and then their child goes and does their own thing, the parent could live in denial, say, no, my child, the image that I'm holding on to is my child as I see them. In the meantime, your child has gone off and done something entirely different. The attachment of a parent to a child is so great that even when the child is not living the ideals that you expect of them, even when the child is not the perfect child as you conceive them, even so, even that image is still ingrained in the parent. That's how deeply rooted and ingrained they are. And that's the same that's true with the Jewish people. It's not just that the Jewish people are in God's mind as they are pristine, because there's a part of you that's always innocent, so that's the innocence remains in God. And the rest of you, it's like as if he's in denial or he turns another cheek, which would be very nice. But this is even deeper. We're saying that even as they are dirtied by gullus, by exile, even that is there, to the point that God needs to cleanse himself from that dirt. Now, v'hinei We know the prophet Ezekiel describes the exodus of Egypt, and he likens it to labor and childbirth. The whole description there is a description of childbirth. So we know that when the people left Egypt, it was like a child being born. And as we know that exile in general is compared to a pregnancy, and redemption is compared to a birth. That so leaving Egypt, they were like a child that was just born, just came out of the mother's womb. A week later, they get to the sea, and now, in that week, they managed to be weaned from their mother. They were growing up. And therefore, so at that point, a child is weaned. That's a child that already starts to speak, starts to say words. But it's not complete. The child doesn't have a full command of language yet. They're just starting to piece together words and sentences. And this is the deeper meaning of why the people couldn't sing the song at the sea on their own. Just that whatever Moses said, they repeated after him. So Moshe started singing. They repeated after Moshe. Why did they have to repeat after him? Because they were like young children. They had just been born. They're just starting to speak. They're not capable now at the sea to start singing on their own. So they had to repeat after Moses. Why? Because they weren't able yet to speak properly and coherently or perfectly like a young child. And this then is the meaning that at the sea, God appeared to them as a young child, or as a young man. We said Bachar, here he says Anar. This means that since the people were at that stage themselves young, so therefore, what was the image in God's mind, as it were? What was the image of the Jewish people in God's mind at that time? Like a young child. And so therefore, what did they see? They saw their own image reflected back at them. When they came to Mara, a little further on, that's where they were sweetened. In their journey from Egypt to Sinai to receive the Torah, there was a stop in Mara. Why was it called Mara? Mara, which means bitter. It's called Mara because they got there and the water was bitter. They couldn't drink any of the water. And so the Moshe threw a stick into the water, and the water was sweetened. So it says they got to Mara, the people arrived at Mara, and the water was bitter. They couldn't drink it. Why? Because Marimhem. What does Marimhem mean? Meaning the water was bitter. So the people get to Mara, they weren't able to drink water because the water was bitter. But the words are not that because the water was bitter, but because they were bitter. What does they were bitter mean? So here the Maggid explains, they were bitter doesn't refer to the water, but it refers to them, to the people. This is the meaning then of Marimhem. They were bitter. Not that we're talking about the water, but it means Yisrael hayu adayin marim. Israel, the Jewish people, were still bitter. And there they were sweetened. When the people were sweetened, that's how as a result, the water was sweetened. El Har Sinai, when they arrived at Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, then they were ready. A little while later, this all happened very quickly. They grew up very fast, and by the time they get to Sinai, now they were able to understand with the higher wisdom. And they were already older. Meaning, what does older mean? We know that zaken, the word for elder, which is zaken, means one who has acquired wisdom, somebody who's wise. So we use the term elder as a euphemism for wise, for scholar. This means, this is the meaning of that in Sinai. At Sinai, God appeared to them as an older person. This means this means that when they got there, they were engraved in God's mind. Since the people now had matured, had grown, and were now able to understand, so therefore, what was the image of the Jewish people in God's mind at that time at Sinai? It was of an older person, a mature person, a wise scholar. And so therefore, what was the image they saw was the one that was in God's mind. This is the end of the teaching of the Maggid. The next page is here. Okay. Let's keep going. Move on. So I'm sorry. So the Maggid says like this. He says that the people are ingrained, that the Jew is ingrained in God's mind. And it's not just that you're ingrained in God's mind in your essence, but your whole being, the whole character of the person is ingrained in God's mind. God has an image, obviously, metaphorically speaking, in God's mind, meaning it rooted in God's essence, is the image of the people as they are. And that changes as people change. So that imagery changes. So mizem move on. So from this we understand, based on the changes that happen down here in this world, from the lowest form of behavior, which is where they become filthy, that God needs to wash himself of that filth, till the highest level, the Jewish people are not only as a young child or as a young man, but as an older person. So that brings about a divine energy that comes back in the same manner. In other words, what does it mean that the fact that when we say that the people perceived God as young or as old, what were they seeing? They were seeing really in their image. Why was God appearing to them as old? Because they appeared to God as old. And so therefore, based on the way they behave, that's the divine energy that's staring them back in the face. Changing based on how they are. Meaning that what they're accessing, the energy, that the divine energy is based on how they are, how they appear, either like older or younger. Even if they're in a state where they need a good shower, even at that state, God would appear to them in that way as well. However, in this, when we talk about this metaphor, Magid it notes, he emphasizes, he's precise, and he adds an expression here that penetrates up to the deepest place, to the highest levels. That the changes that happen down here are engraved in a higher. In God's higher mind. And the emphasis here is on ba'ifin shel chakika daika, on the idea that it's engraved. What does that mean? As it's known, she'inyan hachakika hu ba'ifin she'tzuras ha'inyan shemichutz himenu nechkekes beigufa. What is the difference between writing and engraving? Writing, you take ink and you put it on paper. The ink gets put onto the paper. It might even bond with the paper, attach itself to it, but it's still two things bonding. But when you talk about engraving means it becomes part of the very thing. The words become part of the stone that they're engraved on. They're no two separate things. It's not two things fused together. It's one and the same. So this means that if we're to say that they're nechkakim b'machshav al yoina, that the people are engraved in God's mind, so that means that they're engraved in God's essence. Meaning that all of these differences in them, in their behavior, in the different stages, are all engraved in God. To appear as a young person or as an older person. So based on this idea, that the Maggid does, you can look at it, take it, sort of superficially and say, very nice, that how do the people look? It's like, there's the famous, the teaching, there's a lot to kamayim upon him, is a verse that says that just as the water reflects your image back at it, you look into the clear water and it will reflect your image back. Same is true with the heart. The heart reflects the other heart. So if you have a kind heart to somebody, that heart will reflect back the same love that you're showing to them. Here, we're saying something even deeper. That it's not just a reflection. That when the people saw God in one way and then they saw him another way, it's because basically there was a reflection. They're looking in the mirror. God reflected back to them what they were. It's not that they were reflecting back what they were. It was projecting what was ingrained in him. We're talking about something that's ingrained in God in his essence. So if it's just a mirror, so it's superficial. Whatever you look like today, that gets reflected back at you. And so that could be subject to change. But we're talking about the essence. How's there change there? Because the changes within man are engraved in God, in his essence. When God looks at the Jewish people and he sees them as he sees them, that's how they're ingrained in his essence. Engraved. So based on this, we can understand what the Rebbe is explaining in his Maimer. In chapter 10 of the Rebbe's Maimer, that through our avodah, through our service, we affect two things. In Yina Aleph, the first thing is that the glory of God, that which we said, as we said, the light that is in all worlds equally is revealed to the point that we make a home for God in this world. And when we say we make a home for God, what's the implication? A home for his essence. Why is it that we can make a home for God's essence? Because we're rooted in God's essence. So we could be rooted in God's essence one way, in a very pristine way. Now our essence, which is pure, is rooted in God's essence. And when we serve God, because we're rooted in essence, we can draw God's essence. Okay? But there's something even more than that. But the second thing is, we can draw down even imminent light, what we call the Mamalakalamin light. To souls and to angels, even down to the Jewish people as they are spread apart and pasturing in foreign gardens, meaning in exile, and in foreign ideas and values. That's because in the essence of God, you find engraved there all the differences in man as he is down here, which is why that energy can come down to the lowest level, even to the place where to a place where there can be the concept of a dirty person, somebody who's dirty. What's the dirt? The dirt means the opposite of holiness. That even there should be felt. Which this is the meaning of Hashmi'ini, that God saying, I want you to tell me. I want to hear your voice. God, in his essence, wants to hear the Jew as he is down here. We're talking about the engraving in the essence of Hashem, literally. Okay. So this is chapter 3, closes out really the first 2 points of chapter 10 of the previous Rebbe's Maimer. Chapter 4, we move on to the third, to another idea, the idea of Tzivos Hashem. Which we're obviously not going to get to in today's class. But let's just try and understand what we've said here. Based on the teaching of the Maggid, that the Jew is engraved in God's mind, and not what's engraved in his mind, not just his pristine essential self, but even his behaviors, even his character. And he brings for this a very compelling metaphor, example of parents and children, that the child and the parent are so connected. The child is so rooted in the parent's essence that however the child is, that's what becomes rooted in the parent's essence. Not just their pristine self, but their self as they go through all the different phases and stages of life. The same is true with the Jewish people and God. That the Jewish people, whatever phase they're in, that's engraved within God. That's engraved in God. Meaning, when we talk about transcendent light, transcendence, there's no difference. Differences don't matter there. They're not significant because where it's going it doesn't relate to it. And so therefore you could be good, you could be bad. Doesn't matter. The light remains the same. But when we talk about Mamalik Lam, we're talking about imminent light, we're talking about personal connection, we're talking about each level receiving what it needs, meaning we're talking about differences. We're talking about a higher Gan Eden, lower Gan Eden, energy in a higher level and in a lower level. How do these differences, how is this affected through our essential service? If we're drawing essence, so how suddenly are there differences? We're going higher than everything, higher than differences. So that's what the Maggid teaches us here and explains that even the differences, even these different stages are also rooted in God's essence. And so when we connect with God and we access the essence of, once you touch essence, you have Seiviv, you have Ramal, you have all of these things. So this is not a different idea. It's not that the previous Rebbe in his Maimer gives us one idea and then he gives us another idea. These two ideas complete the whole picture here. If we're talking about essence, it's not then necessarily you're going to end up with these 2 points. You're going to end up with Soyer, you're going to end up with Mamala, because we're talking about rooted in God's essence as one final point, something the Rebbe doesn't say here in the Maimer. The Rebbe says in the Sicha at the Farbrengen, the Shabbos after Yud Shvat, the Rebbe touched on different points in the Maimer, and the Rebbe said something interesting that I think also helps us understand this idea here. In the Maggid's teaching, he quotes Rachatz Hashem Tzayas B'nai Tzion, God washing away the filth of B'nai Tzion. Why he brings that verse? I mean, the point he makes his point, right? But then he brings in that verse to tell us that even the Jew, as he's dirty, that, so to speak, dirty is God, and God needs to wash himself. But then he brings another verse, the idea of Marimheim, that they were bitter. Yeah, so that seems already a little bit of like a sort of a little off the topic. Yet he brings in this idea of Marim, that the water was bitter. He explains that not the water was bitter because they were bitter. In other words, the behavior above is dictated by what happens below, kind of. It seems like a slightly different idea. So the Rebbe explains that story of the water was bitter. So why was it that the water was bitter? So the commentaries explain that the water was bitter because the people went 3 days without study Torah. It's interesting that it's from that episode that it was established that we don't go 3 days without reading from the Torah. So that's why we read Shabbos, Monday, and Thursday, so we can never have 3 days go by without reading from the Torah. Because that's what had happened to the people when they left Mitzrayim, and they went 3 days without Torah, and what happened? They were bitter. As the Maggid says, they were bitter. So we see actually how this simple commentary really on that episode, and even the halachic ramifications of it relate to what the Maggid says here, which is that the people were bitter. They had no Torah, they were bitter. How was that water sweetened? So there are 2 opinions. Moshe throws a stick into the water and it's sweetened. What did he throw in? So there's one opinion that it was something sweet, Eitz HaChaim, a branch from the tree of life. Another opinion is that he threw in a bitter branch. That sweetened the water. The Rebbe explains that this is relevant to understanding the depth of this vart here, and why it's necessary to say that the people are rooted in God, is in God's essence, even when they're dirty. If the people are rooted in God's essence, even with their dirt, to the extent as the verse says, that God needs to wash himself of that dirt. So you have 2 things. You can either cleanse yourself or sweeten the water by throwing in Eitz HaChaim, overwhelm with light. You overwhelm it with light. You bring in an abundance of light, and that, there's no greater, what's the expression? Nobody I know is going to help me, but there's no greater salve, or there's no greater remedy than sunlight, or than daylight or something. You overwhelm it with light, and that cleans a lot of problems. But then there's something else, which is that the darkness itself starts to shine. The Yisrei Na'arim and Achayshach, the light that comes from the darkness. Why is there a light that comes from the darkness? Because since the darkness itself is rooted in God's essence, the Jew, as he's in his darkened state, is rooted in God's essence, so there's nothing bad in God. And if there's nothing bad, so we have to say that darkness will also be redeemed. That there's a redeeming quality in there. There's a greater light that will come out of that darkness. And so that's the idea that the Maggid is telling us here, that the Jew is rooted in God, in his essence, and so therefore every part of the experience is rooted in God's essence, and that's what's going to shine. Ultimately, that's where that light is going to come from, even from within that darkness. And with this, we conclude the first half of the Maimer, the ideas of Basi, Legani, and Yeshevas Beganim, the idea that through Avodah, we make a home for God, for his essence. And on the one hand, we're talking about total transcendence, and at the same time, we're also talking about immanence, we're talking about Mamala Kalam, we're talking about drawing in each world according to its place, because why is it that a Jew can make a home for God? Because he's rooted essentially in God, and through his specific service, he can impact God, because every part of his life and every part of his being, every part of his experience is rooted in the essence of God.